Good evening, I'm Barkha Dutt. You're watching The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does an in-depth look at the big stories of the day. On the program today, the government is finally letting the private sector into the vaccine rollout. Private clinics will now be open to those above 60 and those above 45 with comorbidities from the 1st of March. This in response to widespread criticism about the crawling pace of the vaccine rollout thus far. Union Minister Prakash Javadekar making these important announcements a short while ago.
कि 1 मार्च से यानी अगले सप्ताह से सोमवार से 60 से ज़्यादा उम्र जिनकी है और ऐसी संख्या 10 करोड़ से भी ज़्यादा है, ऐसे सभी लोगों को और 45 से ज़्यादा उम्र जिनकी है लेकिन जिनको कोमॉर्बिडिटी है, कोई ना कोई दूसरी बीमारी है, ऐसे 45 से ज़्यादा उम्र वाले लोगों को भी 1 मार्च से टीकाकरण किया जाएगा। 10,000 सरकारी केंद्रों पर और लगभग 20,000 से भी ज़्यादा प्राइवेट केंद्रों पर, हॉस्पिटल्स में ये टीकाकरण होगा। और उसमें सबसे बड़ा फैसला ये है कि जो 10,000 सरकारी केंद्रों पर जाकर टीका लगवाएंगे, कोई भी हो, उसको मुफ्त टीका लगेगा। सरकारी हॉस्पिटल में मुफ्त लगेगा, सरकारी केंद्रों पर, और प्राइवेट में जो लेंगे उनको अर्थात उसका शुल्क देना पड़ेगा।
All right, so if you're going to a private center, you'll have to pay for your vaccine. That price will be set, however, by the government. Is this going to address the slow pace of the vaccine rollout? Is it more importantly going to address vaccine hesitancy? Remember, 43% of frontline workers entitled to the vaccine have not shown up for their second dose. And in 8 states, 50% of beneficiaries have not turned up to be inoculated at all. Amidst all of this, a vaccine like Pfizer has withdrawn its application because of the insistence of a local trial by government authorities. Let's take a look at what the vaccine rollout might look like after this decision and this set of announcements by the government. Let me introduce our panelists on the program today. We're joined by Professor Sudhir Krishnan, who's with the IIT Goa as well as with the NCPS. We're also joined by Dr. Anurag Agrawal, who's a director with the CSIR. Welcome to the program. Dr. Ambrish Mithal is with us, and we're also joined by Dr. Ambarish Satwik from Gangaram Hospital. Welcome everybody to the program. Let me start with you, Dr. Satwik. Let me start straight away with you. There have been massive amounts of concern that without the private sector, there could not be any sort of movement in this vaccine rollout. What do you think of the slew of decisions that have been taken by the government at this point?
Thank you. I think all of us should welcome the decision to include the private sector. I don't think it's advantageous to create an artificial scarcity. Matters such as this should be handled entirely on a demand and supply basis, and I don't think state capacity to administer vaccines should be allowed to influence the number of people vaccinated. And I think it's also quite welcome that private players will be remunerated in case they're administering the vaccine, because I see no reason why everybody in the country should be vaccinated free of charge. I think a direct benefit transfers or directed subsidies and vaccination make more sense. But I think the state should clearly augment its capacity to administer vaccines by allowing private players to go ahead.
And are you're comfortable with the fact that those who go to a private vaccine center and 20,000 of them are going to be deployed, Dr. Satwik, should pay for their vaccine, and if you go to a government center, then the state will pay for it?
Yeah, I think if you can afford the vaccine, there's no reason why you shouldn't pay for it. I see no reason why the state should subsidize my vaccination. No reason at all.
So all of this is something you agree with. The set of announcements made today is something you agree with. All of it. Maybe it was a bit delayed. Some might argue. One other question that might come, and then I'll open it up for the panel, Dr. Satwik, is whether people should have a choice on which vaccine they should be given. And I ask this because the Bharat Biotech vaccine is still not through with its third phase trials. So there is a tendency among many people to prefer the Covishield vaccine at this point?
As far as I understand the situation, I don't think the Bharat Biotech vaccine is being administered outside of state-run hospitals in a few cities. I think all the others are administering the Serum Institute vaccine. If the state is the sole portal of procurement for vaccines that have been tried and tested and is the sole source of dissemination, I see no reason why candidates should have an option of choosing between two tried and tested vaccines, unless there are specific medical indications that will not allow for a particular vaccine. But I don't see why there should be no choice between a vaccine that has been tried and tested and a vaccine that has not been tested. That doesn't make sense.
Okay, let me then open this up for the panel right away. Dr. Mithal, I mean, Dr. Satwik says that these are measures that there is no disagreement with, but the fact of the matter is that our rollout has been really slow at this point, and we have about 150 days to vaccinate close to 250 million people. And the New York Times had a graph today saying that before 75% of India's population could be vaccinated at this rate, and the rate could of course change with these slew of measures. So that's just the health warning. It could take another 10 to 15 years before we got to that point. Dr. Mithal.
Let's look at the facts first. The Indian track record in vaccination has been pretty good. Of course, there are different kinds of vaccination. There's also the fact that it's the first time in the history of the world that we're trying to vaccinate people while a pandemic is on. So that's pretty unusual. So I think we have made a slow start, but I don't think we made a dismal start. I think most people that one would talk to, know, and look at the numbers have to be looked at very carefully, have actually received vaccinations. Most healthcare workers who are involved in COVID care have received vaccinations. So I think it certainly should be faster. And I was hoping it would have picked up like 1 week after it was launched, but it's taken very long. And even now it's not going at the pace that it should. So I think it's completely logical and the need of the hour to have the private sector involved, use other avenues. When 80% of your healthcare is delivered by the private sector, when during COVID times the private sector played such a big role in testing for the virus as well as treating people affected by COVID, there is no question that we should restrict. And I suspect that the government was testing the waters or trying to be ultra cautious. Whatever it was, it is a bit late. But I think I heartily welcome all this. It's a big relief because the phone never stops ringing from my patients. It's almost embarrassing to say, I am vaccinated, but you have to wait. I think that sort of is going to, that's going to go away. So I think this strategy will work. It will not work to perfection. Nothing works to perfection, especially in a country like India. But we will definitely increase the reach of the vaccine very significantly by allowing 20,000 private centers to come in. So I'm all for it.
Okay, let me get Sudhir in now. Sudhir, you and I have argued about this before. You're actually one of those who would be an example of vaccine hesitancy. You've spoken about this before, and the fact of the matter is, when you look at the recent surge of cases in at least few states, which has caused, let's say, cities like Delhi to impose new restrictions, now requiring a negative RT-PCR certification for those coming in from these states. Do you think you were wrong? Do you think you were wrong in your hesitation about the vaccine? And clearly what you feel, a number of frontline workers feel as well, because we have the data that shows us that less than 50% of beneficiaries in 8 states have actually used these vaccines. And that is a key part of the problem in terms of the pace of this rollout, and we're actually having vaccines go waste.
So let's unpick several things that you raised, Barkha. The first is that when I talked about vaccine hesitancy, that was specifically for me that I was in no rush to get a vaccine. And so it was more vaccine. I was not in a rush to get a vaccine. But let me start through the comments right from the beginning. There was this comment about one vaccine not being tested versus another vaccine which has been tested. The AstraZeneca efficacy rates have varied from 10% to 90%. So I'm not sure exactly when you say efficacy and tested, which one do they mean? Mm-hmm. Given that the pandemic here is pretty much under control, and I assume you're vaccinating for variants, then are we looking at the 10% efficacy which has been used in South Africa and stopped?
And
So I think
and just a clarification, you're saying that the pandemic is under control despite the spike we've seen now for several consecutive days, at least in 5 or 6 states.
so. The shape of the pandemic has not essentially changed, and a spike was, of course, expected. It was very unlikely that when you opened up the economy, vulnerable groups came out, that there wouldn't be some level of spike. But there's been nothing that is alarming. I think there's a challenge. I think there's a need for caution, but I certainly don't think there's a need for panic.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But let me get back to this point about efficacy. I think we should dump this whole efficacy idea soon. There've been a lot of very good modeling which has been done recently, which questions this whole idea of efficacy. And the Lancet Infectious Diseases has a very interesting article recently on how efficacy is calculated. And so, with such varying efficacy for AstraZeneca, I think one should be cautious about pitting one vaccine against the other. They're both good vaccines. I think the AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK I assume is contributing to their significant drop in numbers. We don't know that. So yeah, I mean, does that address what you're
really.
asking?
No, not really. It doesn't. You've actually just completely confused me. You've said, oh, the pandemic is surging, but it's fine. You haven't answered my question. Would you take the vaccine? Would you take the vaccine? Would you
I'm
take
not
the
in a rush
vaccine?
to take the vaccine. I'm not
I
in
don't
a
know.
rush.
I don't know what that means. Is that if you had the opportunity to walk down to your health center and take the vaccine, would you take the vaccine or would you not take the vaccine? Would you be an example of frontline workers and doctors who have not shown up, who've declined to take the vaccine, or would you take the vaccine? And if you wouldn't take it, why would you not take it?
If health workers, vulnerable groups who are exposed to COVID, they should be encouraged to take the vaccine. Absolutely. I don't see myself as someone who is alarmingly exposed to COVID. I don't handle high viral load patients.
Okay.
I've been out there right from the beginning. I'm probably heavily seropositive. I've been taking all kinds of natural precautions. I haven't fallen ill in the last 1 year. So at a personal level, yes, I don't see a rush to get vaccinated. But that doesn't mean that at a public health level, I would not encourage vulnerable groups. I would support the state and private sectors. I agree with all those comments to roll out the vaccines. I'm not telling people not to take the vaccine.
Okay, I let the experts respond to your point of pitting one vaccine against the other. I just want to get Dr. Anurag Agrawal in at this point. What are your concerns, even given the announcement by the government and allowing the private sector in? There is a kind of slow-moving vehicle here, and in terms of looking at how many people we're vaccinating as a percentage of the population, we're way behind countries like the United States, the United Kingdom. We're fourth globally and much lower if looked at as a percentage of the population, right? What are your concerns at this point, Dr. Agrawal?
Barkha, I think you have the last point absolutely right. Look at percentage of population vaccinated. That is really what we need to do.
Yeah.
And I personally think we have a window in the middle of this pandemic where we have a chance to vaccinate the high-risk vulnerable people. We should take it. We should do it as fast as we can. And I think today's decision by the government is a very welcome one, every part of it. And I personally think that vaccination is the way to go, not necessarily for only personal protection, but as a contribution towards public health in terms of making sure that we are marching towards herd immunity by acquired immunity from vaccination as opposed to getting infected ourselves. Plenty of that has happened already.
Mm-hmm. Explain that last point. There's been so much debate about herd immunity. Yeah, go ahead.
So the reason, ultimately any pandemic dies when a sufficient number of people are immune to it. They can be either naturally immune, they may never get the infection, they may recover and become immune for a unspecified duration of time, probably 8 months at least, or they may be vaccinated and without getting infected become immune. As we know from this virus, the number is going to be somewhere in the range of 60-70%. We don't know how many percentage of people are naturally immune. That's an unknown number. We can estimate that anywhere near 20%. Going by Indian seropositivity data, we can estimate another 1/3 of the population might be getting close, at least in cities or more. And the rest pretty much will have to get vaccinated. And the point is, the people who are recovered and temporarily immune, it will not last forever. We are seeing that in Brazil. We are seeing that in other places. So I personally think we need to march fast towards getting people with long-lasting immunity. And the best solution I know of right now, we can debate on numbers, is vaccines.
Now, one of the debates has been, Dr. Mittal, and I'll bring you in at this point, has been over the Pfizer vaccine and whether we should have actually welcomed more vaccines than making it difficult for Pfizer to actually come into the country. And at this point, how can we even ask for local trials? What is your take on this?
I think the normal protocol in more normal circumstances is to have a local trial. Every single drug that is used in India, it has to be used on Indians for some time. There's a smaller number of subjects involved and a shorter follow, but it has to be used. Now, these are exceptional circumstances. There's no doubt about that. But the fact is that getting in Pfizer, how would it change anything at the moment? I don't think we are one of those countries that is struggling with vaccine shortage. If most developing countries, you like to call them third world or whatever, they are struggling with shortage of vaccine. They don't have enough vaccine. That's not our primary problem. If that was the primary problem, I would have said, yes, we should allow everyone in. If they want to allow, I have nothing against, in principle, allowing Pfizer in. But the fact is that our problem is the distribution. Our problem is the administration of the vaccine. Our problem is not shortage of vaccine per se. So when we have vaccines available, what we have to do is find better ways to deliver them and really fast. And yes,
so you're saying we don't need you're saying we don't need more vaccines. But now
I have nothing against, sorry, Barkha. I have nothing against allowing Pfizer and even Moderna in, but I don't see how they'll make a quantitative difference to our approach to this pandemic. What will make a difference is there are stocks and stocks of Covishield, etc., lying in the country. We have enough vaccine, at least for the moment. And and then at some stage, of course, you can allow Pfizer, Moderna, whomsoever you like it. It's an open world, free world, so people should have the choice. But right now, I think it's not going to make a material difference to our approach, whether we have other kinds of vaccines or not.
Does anyone disagree, or does everyone pretty much agree that we don't really need the Pfizer, Moderna vaccines? Sudhir, are you wanting to come in? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not worried about the Pfizer or Moderna bit, but I think in terms of the potential of using nucleic acid systems as vaccines, so I think what are you vaccinating for at this point? You're vaccinating for vaccine capacity, you're augmenting herd immunity, you're targeting vulnerable groups, and you're creating vaccine innovation. And if you want to drive vaccine innovation, this is your one chance to actually explore those issues. So I would go ahead and push the nucleic acid systems in place so that we get a sense of what they are, what kind of systems that we need for them. This is an absolutely fabulous opportunity to build new platforms. I think what we will see at the end of the day are multimeric vaccines where we target multiple viruses which have variants. We predict viruses and build vaccines for them. The whole world is going to get revamped in vaccines. So I think nucleic acid vaccines should be allowed. I think we've protected the manufacturing industry in vaccines so far, but now is the time to expand that scope. Whether you do it through Pfizer or Moderna, I mean, that's hardly an argument for me. I mean, I would certainly broaden the number of vaccines.
How do we, if we agree that Sudhir says broaden the number of vaccines, Dr. Mittal, you say that you don't really need it because that's not the problem. The problem actually that we're seeing is a kind of vaccine hesitancy, and we're seeing it among doctors and health workers, right? And Dr. Agrawal, how do we address that? How do you address that? Because if the general population is going to see that doctors are not showing up to get their vaccine, or health workers are not showing up to get their vaccine, then it's going to lead to that kind of anti-vax rumor mongering that then becomes part of the narrative, right?
I personally believe that when we open the vaccines to normal people, particularly the older ones with comorbidities, they will have less hesitancy than many doctors had. See, many doctors were thinking that if I get the mRNA vaccine, which has a higher efficacy rate in some of the trials, let me wait for the best one. Normal people will settle for getting a vaccine in a timely manner. Sometimes I think doctors are the worst patients. I mean, I'll be very honest with that.
Yeah.
And I think there is no reason for us to automatically believe that normal people will have as much hesitancy. I've had multiple doctors talk to me about whether the mRNA or the DNA would change their genomes. And you've seen all kinds of poor quality WhatsApp rumors floating around, even in medical communities. And we are sometimes more likely to, believe the half-truths with the nucleic acid word in there. I personally think we will do fine. I will just like to say one thing Sudhir said was very important. I think Dr. Mithal is right that the problem that we are facing is not these vaccines or not. It might be peripherally for some of us who might prefer them mRNA vaccine technology for elderly parents, where we are talking about individual efficacy as opposed to social efficacy. However, I think India has a huge opportunity in mRNA technology in general, beyond vaccines into therapeutics and everything else. And we must make sure that we balance our needs together and we don't let people come in and get an emergency approval without willingness to test in Indians if we have not allowed in the past. If there was an emergency pandemic was going on, I would say, okay, and we were short of vaccines. Right now, we should enforce our own system. I see nothing wrong with it.
Ambrish Satwik, do you agree with that?
Yes, I'd like to come in and respond to a few comments that were made. First of all, I think about vaccine hesitancy. The trouble is that if I'm entitled, if I'm getting a shot and I'm refusing the shot, I'm culpable because I'm not contributing to herd immunity. Okay, it's not just the old and the vulnerable that require the vaccine, but you need a critical mass of people who have been vaccinated in any community to achieve herd immunity, as Dr. Agrawal said, either herd immunity through natural infections or through induced by vaccines. So if I'm refusing a shot, I think that's pernicious. Secondly, I think when I made the statement about choice between a tested vaccine and an untested vaccine, the thing with the Bharat Biotech vaccine is that it's been only subjected to phase 1 and phase 2 trials where we have the results out, and phase 3 trials are underway. And for all the people who are saying that phase 2 trials have established safety and efficacy, phase 2 trials only mean that the intervention is safe and efficacious enough to be taken to the next level, which is phase 3. It does not mean that the intervention is safe and efficacious enough for mass vaccination in a country. Okay, so I will still nominate Bharat Biotech at this point as an untested vaccine. It may turn out to be the best vaccine in the world, but at this point in time, it's an untested vaccine. About the comment on the efficacy in South Africa of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and the large range of efficacy results that we are experiencing, a few things are quite certain. First is that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is offering reasonable protection against transmission of infections. That means that if you're vaccinated and even if you get hold of the virus, you're not shedding it. Secondly, it's offering excellent protection against severe COVID and COVID-related mortality. So the chance across countries, wherever it has been tested, what that means is that, immunological protection is a gradient. It's not an all or none phenomenon. It means that, even if you get COVID after getting vaccinated, it's highly unlikely that you will suffer a major form of the disease or require hospitalization or will die of COVID. And that, for me, is a great accomplishment of any vaccine. And about the DCGI not granting emergency use authorization to Pfizer, I'd like to say that, look, it's a bit rich because this is extremely stilted and bureaucratic on the part of the Subject Expert Committee. On the 4th of February, when there's enough real-world data, forget about trials where Pfizer have been tested, there's enough real-world data. Now you've got 80% of Israel who's got that has got the first shot. I mean, tens of millions of people have got the Pfizer vaccine. To say that, no, we will not grant you emergency use authorization because you haven't had bridging trials in India is a bit rich because, they've allowed emergency use authorization for many drugs without any sort of local trials. So, they're well within their rights to say that, no, we will not allow you. But I think it's needlessly stilted that they're being unyielding.
And why do you think it's happened? I mean, do you think it's a kind of vaccine nationalism, or what is it? What is it according to you?
I don't know. I have no idea, who the constituents of the Subject Expert Committee are and what, because they've given two reasons for refusing emergency use authorization. The first one states anaphylaxis and Bell's palsy and so on.
Yeah.
But now that we have so much real world data, I think the adverse effects, because that have been stated, are minuscule. And the second is that because there haven't been bridging trials. In fact, right now we need as many vaccines as possible. But the more egregious problem that the subject expert committee has committed is not in reference to the Pfizer vaccine, but in reference to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Because while there is overwhelming evidence that the efficacy of the vaccine is much, much higher, almost 83%, when the two doses are given at a gap of 12 weeks, the subject expert committee has said, no, you should administer the second dose at 4 weeks. I see no reason for this recommendation, and I think all the experts on this panel will concur with that.
Okay, let's see what they say. Sudhir, you wanted to come in, and since you're the one person who's saying you're not in a hurry to get the vaccine, the argument being made is that it's not a personal choice. You need to do it almost as a duty, and so you can go ahead and react to the rest.
Let's unpick some of the AstraZeneca issues first. To the best of my knowledge, there's been no AstraZeneca efficacy trial done in India, but do correct me if I'm wrong on that. So since efficacy is so context specific, so pandemic specific, I think that would be useful information. The second is, I read the AstraZeneca trial data quite closely in the US, the transmission as monitored in people who were non-symptomatic, it didn't work at all. So people who were actually non-symptomatic, the virus was transmitted. So this point that it stops transmission is not true. So I think it's a reasonable vaccine.
It may not stop you from transmission, but at least saves your own life from severe.
It's a reasonable vaccine.
And you may or may not still be a vector, is what I've understood in a very layperson.
The arguments about efficacy, they've not been done in India to the best of my knowledge. And I assume that at this point of the pandemic, where we are down to less than 100 deaths per day, with about a little over 10,000 infections, you're vaccinating outside the vulnerable group against potential variants. And so if the South African variant, it has a 10% efficacy, but let's not repeat ourselves on that. Let's move to other issues. In terms of the mRNA vaccine, I don't have an issue. I mean, there are two conflicting views on how the clinical trials of them should be done. As I said, I'm very keen that it drives vaccine innovation. It challenges our vaccine industry. We're 1 year down the line in the COVID pandemic. We've got our vaccine rollouts in place. So I would welcome the vaccines, but follow whatever process. I don't have a strong view on that at all.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. The last point was about me getting a vaccine. I only said that I don't have to rush to get a vaccine. I never said I won't get a vaccine. I'll get it when I have to, and I will do it.
Okay, Dr. Agrawal.
So, while I agree a lot with what Ambrish said, there are certain points where I disagree. Let me bring those out first.
Yeah.
One of the most important, and I'm not part of the committee, by the way, but one of the things a committee goes with is first do no harm. So safety data becomes paramount. And while there is significant reason to believe, given the number of Indian doctors in US and UK who had the vaccine, that Pfizer is absolutely safe, I will give you one reason where even I would have minor concerns. Now, the mRNA vaccine is far more immunogenic compared to the other vaccines. If you just look at the absolute numbers in a comparable manner, the numbers seem far, far higher. Now, when you vaccinate somebody who has already been infected, what will happen, and will they have more symptoms? So a lot of my colleagues, and I'm speaking a bit hearsay now, the second shot is to make them more symptomatic than they were in the first one. Now, if you were to start giving it to a population, for example, in Delhi, you're looking at healthcare workers at 50% plus seropositivity, I would have liked to know, given an mRNA vaccine, what is the degree of immune reactions I might expect. I don't expect anything to go wrong. I'll personally be honest with you. But it is not unreasonable of the committee to demand some degree of data before giving them permission.
And why is the global data not good enough for us?
The background seropositivity in the global populations is extremely low compared to India. So number of people who have been vaccinated who were seropositive and Indian. Remember, there is going to be a bit of your own genetics, your background, and so on.
Okay.
Combination of genetics and Indian probably hasn't been done. So where I agree with him is that it's a bit rich when you look at the entire thing taken together. But in isolation, that decision is a sensible one.
Okay,
Ask
so,
additional
sorry.
data.
Dr. Satwik, quickly, and then I want to come to Dr. Mithal. We should start taking last comments. Yeah.
Well, the more the merrier. I mean, if we have Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, Johnson & Johnson, the more the merrier. We should give emergency use authorization to all of these. We may or may not choose to use them. To respond, Professor Sudhir, first, I think the South African data is about the South African variant. And that is a variant of concern. And therefore, it seems that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is not efficacious against mild infections of COVID due to the South African variant. There's been no data whether it's efficacious in preventing severe infections. In my discussions with some vaccinologists, they seem to be quite confident that it is probably efficacious in preventing severe disease, but it's not effective in preventing mild disease, mild form of COVID.
Okay. Got to start taking last comments. Dr. Mithal, I'll start with you. Pfizer is one part of the debate. I think vaccine hesitancy is the much larger part. And the second is what may be called COVID fatigue, or, a genuine disagreement over whether India has actually the worst is over. There are many people like Sudhir who have for a long time believed that given the fatalities, we don't need to go into the kind of panic and tailspin that we're going into. The problem is, irrespective of what you think medically, vaccines are going to be connected to the reopening of the economy, to our lives as we knew it. So vaccines are really important, whichever way you cut it. Dr. Mithal.
I mean, I think that, as I said earlier, it's very, very clear. This is the first time when a pandemic is raging that you've actually been able to develop a plethora of vaccines, and you have so many choices worldwide. So I think we will be incredibly, I don't think we'll be smart if we say, no, we can go slow. I think the pandemic is at a low. We don't know enough about the virus to say whether it's going to come back with a bang or not. I think when the pandemic is in this situation, exactly where Sudhirji was saying, this is where we need to really stretch our capacity to vaccinate our population. And at least, whole population of India is something else, but at least start with the 60 plus and 45 plus with comorbidities. That also will be a great service. And I think one problem that we are having in this discussion, I think the science part is very exciting of the mRNA vaccine. There's no question about it. And it's a huge opportunity. And yes, you can have more the merrier. And I've been writing consistently that the second shot for Astra should be at 12 weeks. At least we should be given the option. But when you are delivering a program, and I think Anurag will understand that what I'm saying, it is very hard to keep too many variables in the picture. When you're actually responsible for delivering, you want to keep it simple. You want to send simple messages down the line to your last worker. And I think that's what the government is trying to do, which doesn't look sometimes completely scientific to us, but it's a mix of science and mix of admin and delivery. We can't take that away, which is why I said, I'm all for a free sort of sale of all kinds of vaccines. But a vaccine like Pfizer that's going to cost so much, that requires storage at a particular temperature, which is going to be hard in India.
Sure.
Back to our pandemic right now.
Okay, I've got to close. Dr. Agrawal, if you like a last word.
I think, Barkha, I'm firmly in the camp. I believe this is not over yet. In fact, if I had to bet money, I would say you will start seeing rise again within the next few months. In India, the summers are when we move indoors to air-conditioned closed spaces. In the West, they move indoors in winters. I look forward to taking all the necessary measures that Delhi, as the summer comes, people start moving back with life, getting into closed air-conditioned malls. As many of us are protected before that as possible, and we maintain COVID-appropriate behavior, this fight is far from done.
Okay, and Sudhir, that's the opposite.
That point of that 12 weeks, even I think there is enough room to rethink our strategy, but exactly as Dr. Ambrish said, one strategy at a time and then clarity on the next one.
Okay, but you would be in favor of the AstraZeneca second dose being given at 12 weeks?
Delaying it forward in a highly seropositive country, yes, it might be a good idea.
Okay, that's an important takeaway. Sudhir, very quickly, and then Dr. Satwik can have the last word. I've got to wrap.
So just to follow up on Anurag's point where he said, the Pfizer should be taken into account with the seropositivity. I agree with that, but I would actually extend, I would extend that to an even bigger issue. discussing vaccines without thinking about what were the determinants of the pandemic in India in the first phase. The demographics, integrative medicine, social clusters, herd immunity. Taking vaccines and just isolating them out is a poor exercise. And all the factors which played out in the first case will play out even more now. You even have herd immunity. So while Anurag is correct that, shifting indoors will probably recreate some of the Western cold conditions, the fact is you're at a completely different point in the pandemic. Your clinical systems know how to handle things. You have a lot more use of integrative medicine. You have a lot more use of allopathic treatments. I mean, in general, I think, sure, expand the vaccination. There's nothing against that at all. But
Okay.
I mean, holistic view of the whole pandemic and learn your lessons from that.
Okay, Dr. Satwik, got to close. Last word.
Well, I think we should vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible, because there is evidence that even the first shot of any of these vaccines is offering a more than reasonable immune response. In fact, even with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, just a single shot after 2 weeks is offering upwards of 70% protection against severe COVID. So as many people as quickly as possible. The variants of concern on account of mutations should be constantly in our crosshairs, because some of these mutations seem to be escape mutations that have managed to evade the immune response, particularly the South African variant, and there's some suspicion about the Brazilian variant. I think we should start doing more genome sequencing per capita, so that we can find out about the more than 7,000 mutations that have been found in some of the samples submitted in India. And we have to figure out if there are any variants of concern, because these variants might evade the immune response generated by the vaccine.
Right, but the short conclusion, if I had to distill it in non-medical language, is that from the 1st of March, you don't have to be a doctor to get that vaccine. So please do get that vaccine. If you're above 60 or you're above 45 and you have any comorbidity, you can now get the vaccine. This is what you've been asking for this whole year, and that moment is upon us. Let the doctors hammer out the sort of differences between one vaccine and the other. But if you can get the vaccine, please do get the vaccine. We leave it there. Thank you so much to our panel, and thank you to our audience for watching. Bye-bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.